This place is nice.
I really like the music that they play. Bob Ellis on the drums. I'm part of Schaefer's Top Jazz Orchestra. It's the best music school in the country.
The key is to just relax. Don't worry about the numbers. Don't worry about what the other guys are thinking. You're here for a reason. Have fun. 5, 6, and.
I want to be great.
And you're not.
We got Buddy Rich here. Little trouble there. You're rushing. Here we go. 5, 6, and. Were you rushing or were you dragging?
I don't know.
If you deliberately sabotage my band, I will gut you like a pig.
Oh, my dear God. Are you one of those single-tier people?
You are a worthless pansy ass who is now weeping and slobbering all over my drum set like a 9-year-old girl.
So how's it going with the studio band?
Good. Yeah, I think he likes me more now.
I push people beyond what's expected of them. I believe that is an absolute necessity.
I want to be one of the greats. And because I'm doing that, it's going to take up more of my time. And this is why I don't think that we should be together.
I would never let him put my son through hell. Why would you let him get away with what he did to you?
There are no 2 words in the English language more harmful than good job.
What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us on the Cinema Club podcast. We're so excited to have you here for our second episode, and man, is it a good one. This week, we're watching the film Whiplash, and I have 2 awesome guests. I have another returning guest from last week, if you guys remember, Connor Fredrickson. Welcome back, dude.
How's it going? Yeah, glad to be back.
And my second guest is actor Austin Howlett. He's actually a member of our club, just met him actually today. So awesome to have you on the podcast, Austin.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So getting into Whiplash, man, this was an awesome movie, Connor.
Oh my God, it's my favorite film of the decade.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite films, been on my list for a long time. I did forget about it, so thanks so much for introducing me again to it.
Yeah, my pleasure. No, it's a good one.
Yeah, so before we get into the synopsis and what this whole thing was about and talk about it, I just wanted to ask you, Connor, this was your movie, dude. You chose it this week, so I want to know, why did you choose this movie?
This movie, it's not, number one, I didn't want to choose a movie for an early episode of this podcast that was going to need a spoiler warning. This movie does not really need a spoiler warning because it's not super plot driven. It's really about the character relationship between professor and student. And that's really what it's all about. So there's no like giant plot twists or anything like that. But the other reason is just because it hits really close to home. A lot of the scenes and a lot of the concepts, I mean, the energy of it is very similar to when I was playing college football. And it's just, when you're in that environment of high achievers, I mean, that high standard, it's a force to be reckoned with. And some people don't understand it. Some people do.
I think we've all had that experience in some manner, whether it be in college, being our parents or whatever. Like I've had so many experiences like with even like that parent scene of not quite meeting somebody's expectations and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of pressure when you're trying to pursue something that nobody else can understand. And when you're in an environment of high achievers too, I mean, there's a high standard there. So it's a high pressure environment, and they really double down on making you feel that way. And my one of my favorite things about the film is how controversial it is, because some people understand that pursuit and some people don't, depending on what kind of person you are. And it's always a really interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the director. I was even talking to one of my friends who is a music producer, and he was telling me that when he saw the film, he wasn't sure what he thought about it, because I mean, there were so many parents even out there when this film came out that didn't want, like, they went to see it. It was so different than what they were expecting, and just the journey that the character Andrew goes through, it is such a harsh journey that, like, a lot of parents even didn't want their kids going into music school because they were afraid of what was going to happen.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like, I totally am not surprised at all. I mean, like, in that, I think that's one of the reasons why I love the movie so much. I mean, when you think about our generation and the parents for a lot of the people in our generation, and like, we're notorious for having helicopter parents. Let's be honest. I mean, we grow up, a lot of us end up growing up in bubbles, and there's that whole PC culture kind of conversation happening. And this was a breath of fresh air, because I mean, like I said, some people get it, some people don't. And obviously this is a very extreme example of a high achiever and their pursuit for what they're trying to achieve. But the energy and the drive and the by any means necessary attitude, I mean, all those core values are there. And I think it was a breath of fresh air in that sense.
Yeah, for sure. Like when I that entire dinner scene was basically how I felt going to an SEC school for theater, because everyone there is just like, go Bulldogs, or it's either like you're a vet tech or whatever. But we had like such a small theater program, so it's like, hey, I'm pursuing acting, and they're like, neat.
Oh man, I'm with you there, man. I mean, I grew up in a sports household. I mean, don't get me wrong, I had plenty of support from my parents, but I grew up in a very sports dominant household, and especially in our American culture, I mean, athletics really, they really dominate, a lot of people's social lives. So I agree with you there. I mean, I think a lot of people go through that, so you got to be pretty headstrong with that stuff.
Well, before we get any further, I want to go into the synopsis of what this whole thing is about, what the film is talking about. And directed by Damien Chazelle, it is 93-94 on Rotten Tomatoes. And the film opens with Andrew Neiman playing the drums at Schaefer Conservatory of Music. Andrew abruptly stops playing the drums when the band conductor Terrence Fletcher appears at the front door of him and asks Andrew some personal information about himself. When Fletcher asks Andrew why he's stopped playing, he resumes playing the drums. As he's playing, Fletcher slams the door. I thought that the intro to this it was so powerful. It just opens on just that slow push in on Andrew as he's playing those drums. You just know what's going on. You see him in the distance. He's just this little thing in the distance. You can feel the pressure already mounting.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the opening and the ending are two of my biggest notes in the film, two of my favorite notes in the film. I mean, the opening, number one, it starts with sound, which is very appropriate considering it's a movie about music, and I thought that was great, so it throws emphasis on that. But then that continuous shot down the hallway, that long take, I mean, it keeps you in that moment with him. And the thing about a long take, by nature, it's constant. It's a long take. And so when he's practicing, you're in that moment with him and he's not stopping. Like, so it allows you to feel how hard he's practicing. And then his interaction with Fletcher, I thought was just an incredible introduction to his character.
Oh, it's such a 1-2 punch.
Yeah, absolutely.
From the beginning, you're already seeing the dynamic that's about to take place with each of the characters. I mean, Chazelle gives it to us just right away.
Oh, absolutely. Which also goes to show like how simple the plot of this film is. I mean, that's your whole that's your whole exposition, right? That's the whole story. That one scene right there, that little back and forth between him and Fletcher, like that just encompasses the entire film as a whole. Like that's what the film's about right there. And not to mention like the coloring in this film too. I mean,
Yeah, that was a note I wrote down, was that the colors were so on point in this film. And I noticed it's something that's something that Chazelle is really strong with in general. I might draw a lot of comparisons to La La Land because that's the movie I had seen before I watched this. I watched this for the first time this morning. But similar to La La Land, the colors were so strong in that film too. And I went into this knowing that he directed La La Land, and I was like, oh, this will be a nice jaunt through Music Land. And I was
Anything but.
sorely. Yeah, no, it's more of like a painful, not a jaunt. Whatever the opposite of that would be.
Yeah.
But I agree that like Fletcher's character is just right there. Like the instant he walks in, first two lines are like, okay, I know who this guy is, and I know what his relationship with Andrew is.
Which also sets us up so good later in the film, where he has some really like emotional moments, some moments where you're like, oh, this guy's a human too, but then he's straight back to that just intimidating force.
Yeah, absolutely. That transitions right into that tryout session between the three drummers. I mean, you know, so like his fury is a force to be reckoned with.
Exactly.
I mean, like it just reminds me of like anytime there was a football practice and somebody like forgot the play or whatever, like too many times, and then just had to and three dudes had to like bear crawl for like 45 minutes or an hour after practice, and we all had to sit there and watch them. You know, like it's just don't screw up, basically.
So the next day, Andrew is in class and meets the primary drummer, Ryan Connolly. Shortly, the professor arrives, and as the class is performing the song, Andrew sees a silhouette looking through the door. After class, Andrew peeks into one of the classrooms where the class is handled by Fletcher. Later, back at the studio band, Andrew is playing drums as the core drummer, and suddenly Fletcher breaks inside. Fletcher, without saying a word, conducts every musician and one at a time, and he gets through everyone. He tells Andrew to come to his classroom the next morning at 6. Okay, I have always been a huge jazz fan. I grew up listening to jazz. My dad would take me to the jazz club in the city every once a month, really. What I really appreciated about this film more than anything was just the fact that jazz has been kind of a dying form of music for a while now, and Chazelle just brings it in. And so when he's playing the Billy's Ann as one of the first songs, it just gets you right into that music of the film.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, I love every single part of this movie. So like every single part we're going to go through, I'm going to praise, and I'm going to hold myself accountable for that. So keep that in mind anytime I talk about this film. There's a reason I chose it, but I loved this scene as well. What I loved about it was from beginning to end, you watched Neiman's arc go from literally the bottom, like starter as a freshman, like he got made fun of by one of the other bandmates, and then he was the alternate, and then he got switched in and then got switched out, and the professor was like, nah, get out of here with that. What was that? And then but he was like, what the hell you been practicing? And then Fletcher just barges in like after he hears that, and then that leads him to go end up being in like one of the biggest bands in the world, in Fletcher's band.
Talk about a big break, dude.
Yeah. And he had a couple of them, but that one was just awesome because you saw the awe in everybody's face. I mean, think about like getting passed up by a freshman like that.
Hey, I've heard, my wife actually started as a music major in voice, and the fact that Fletcher comes in and just without a word, not even asking people's names, just goes, play for me. Okay, and you have one chance. That's how music school is. So much of the time, you have one chance to get it right, and if you get it wrong, you're out.
See, I wouldn't know that, but I can relate to it because it never ceases to amaze me how many similarities sports and the art world actually have. I mean, when you get to that elite level, because I mean, even though in this part of the story, Neiman is not in that elite band yet, that's still an elite school. that's still an elite conservatory. And so when you get into that environment, whether it's Division I football or if it's a high level music school, like that mentality stays the same, even though they're like completely different types of people. I mean, like that mindset, that environment, that connection is still the same. And I could definitely relate to it. And what I didn't know before was that jazz drumming was like the most technical form of drumming, and it was the most like demanding form of drumming. And I wouldn't have known that until I talked to one of my friends who is a drummer.
It also shows like even outside of his own band how powerful Fletcher is, because like everyone like in that room was like, including like the teacher or whatever in that classroom, was just like silent
and just stepped away when Fletcher came in and was like, okay, you got this.
Oh yeah, no, that goes back to like the very first scene too. It was like, do you know who I am? It's like, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so everybody knows who this guy is. And I think that was a great form of that's a great piece of exposition too, that's written without dumping it on us. And I think Damien Chazelle did a great job with that, because he told us without telling us exactly like how powerful J.K. Simmons' character is. I thought that was a great execution that deserves credit as well.
So Andrew meets Nicole, the girl working at the cinema, and asks her to go out with him. The next day, Andrew wakes up and realizes that he is late for class. He rushes quickly to the school, only to arrive to an empty classroom. Andrew waits in the classroom until the rest of the class comes into class 5 minutes before 9 a.m. At exactly 9 a.m. to the second, Fletcher arrives and begins conducting the song called Whiplash. During the band's practice, Fletcher confronts the band suddenly and yells at a trombonist named Metz playing out of tune and angrily tells him to get out of the studio band. This escalates Fletcher's abusiveness and wrath. Fletcher has the class take a break, and Andrew and him have a conversation about his life and family.
All those inserts, I love the use of inserts and how they're done in this film, especially with that shallow depth of field. It feels claustrophobic. Like, not only are those inserts very tight, but with that tight depth of field, it's very claustrophobic, and it works for this plot line.
I was gonna say, it's interesting on that, because I read something, I noticed it too when I was watching it, that all the shots of the band are so tight and claustrophobic, but when it goes to Andrew, there's like so much blank space around him, because he's like so isolated from everyone else because of just the situation that he's in and him being so new. Like, I feel like whenever you saw him, like, it was just him. But if you saw band members, it was like the entire band.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about that too. Just the Andrew's whole journey throughout. Like, I related so much to Andrew because like so much of the time you go into college and you're like, oh, I want to have friends and stuff, and I want to be that social person. But there are some people that just make college the pathway to their career. And that was kind of partly how I went through college. Is I was focused so much on what I was doing and trying to make my films and just focus on getting through college, that, hey, sometimes I had to, even if I wanted friends, just the fact that I was trying so hard for what I wanted, for the dream that I had, sometimes you have to sacrifice those things. Like Andrew, so much of the time during the film, like he's trying to interact with people, but like what's more important to him is his dream.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I loved his and Nicole's interactions. For one, I love Melissa Benoist, just as an actress. I really like her. But I thought all the interactions were so great. And I remember watching this movie being like, she's going to be the one that's going to save him, or whatever. And like, you could tell like he's wanting to open up and be more human, be more of like a person. But then once Fletcher gets into his mind after like that first rehearsal he has after that date he has with her, well, you know, that it all just kind of goes downhill from there.
Because he gets a quick reminder of how demanding it is what he wants to do. And I mean, back to what you were saying, Nick, like when I was in school, I mean, you and I were both similar in that sense. I mean, I've had these conversations before where like, for some people who don't know me that well think that I go out and I party all the time and I'm a great fun guy. And I am fun when I go out, but like what people don't realize is that for every bar or party that they saw me at, I sacrificed a dozen more. I sacrificed so many parties and tailgates and clubs and bars, like, you know, and it's just what you have to do. Now, like my first 2 years, like I was kind of trying to figure out who I was. But then once I figured out exactly what I wanted to do, it was like pedal to the metal.
doing theater, there's not as much like pre and post production, obviously, as film stuff. But like we would have like those 10 to 12 rehearsal days, like 12-hour rehearsal days, like a lot. So that I was kind of like, and like especially working as like contracted gigs a lot as an actor. I feel like you form relationships with people, but you don't want to get too close because you're like, well, I'm going to be leaving this town in a month, so you know.
So after the break, the class resumes, but Fletcher loses patience with Andrew's drum tempo and throws a chair past Andrew. Fletcher then mocks Andrew about his parents being separated and continues berating him. In his practice room after class, humiliated, Andrew practices his drums throughout the night until his hands are bleeding. Now, I just wanted to tack on here just the fact that, like, you see, there are so many moments in here where Fletcher just seems like a human, and he seems like he's being vulnerable with Andrew especially, but then he just uses that against him. I mean, this is a perfect example. It's the first one where he goes up to Andrew, and it's his first day in class, and he's like, just tell me a little bit about yourself. But then he immediately, right after that, just uses that against him. Another moment is later in the film when like they're at the jazz club, and he's like, hey, I'd love to have you in my band for this competition. And then during the competition, he uses it against him.
Yeah, so the first time I watched this, first time I ever watched it, that stuff caught me a little bit. Now, this time when I watched it, I was paying much more close attention to the subtlety, to the subtext in their conversations. And I noticed that every time that Fletcher showed his humanity, whether it was when, what's his name, Neiman first enters the band, he shows some empathy, tries to get to know him a little bit, he tries to understand who the kid is. So he's trying to figure, and like all the great coaches and everything will do that. They'll figure out exactly who their player or who their musician is, find out exactly what kind of person is and what gets under their skin, what makes them tick. They'll do that because every musician you have to attack differently to get the most out of them. So that's what he was doing there. And then when that musician that he used to know dies in a car accident, it shows his humanity, but it really shows, after all the harshness that we just experienced with him, it shows that he really, really cares.
And that's the thing. I'm not saying that like he just used the stuff against them for nefarious purposes. No, as you find out later in the film, he was doing all of this stuff intentionally because nobody else in their life would push them.
Right. And this is the part where, like I said earlier, some people understand this film and some people don't. And I think these are the things that people, if you didn't end up in one of those environments of elite achievers in any sense, or don't really understand that kind of drive, then you're not going to catch that. Like, so, and then when he puts Neiman in the band at the end as well, I mean, those are the big three. When Neiman enters the band, when Fletcher's old pupil dies in a car accident, and then when he puts Neiman in the band at the end. Those are the three times that Fletcher opens up his humanity. But all three of those points or moments turn into an opportunity for Neiman to prove himself. You know what I'm saying? So, he seems like a jerk, like on the surface. But if you really dig deep to what he's really trying to accomplish, he really wants to bring the best out of me.
And another comparison here that I thought Damien Chazelle just did such a good job here is when he's in the practice room, he has that picture of Buddy Rich. And actually, Buddy Rich is his idol, and right after that, you also hear him or see him open up a CD of Buddy Rich's, and he's listening to Buddy Rich throughout. And one thing I found out is that Buddy Rich was self-taught, just like Andrew, but also Rich was infamous. He had an infamous short temper and was known to berate and verbally abuse his bandmates. I think that's such a good foreshadowing if you know like the Buddy Rich history, a foreshadowing of what's about to happen in the film. So later, Andrew has dinner with his dad and some of their family friends, and as they're talking about their children and what their accomplishments are, Andrew is confronted about his career choices and gets angry and storms out. Now, this one hit me so hard because I mean, all of our parents have expectations of us, but like for me personally, there was just some times in life where I just felt like those expectations were so much higher than what I could actually accomplish. And even though like I was doing all this kind of stuff and trying to be the best that I could be, I mean, you always feel like you're falling short in some moment, and this scene especially like just shows that like he's doing his best. He's trying to be somebody great, not just be somebody who's going to be eventually just a principal or the president of some community society. He wants to be great, and sometimes that path to greatness comes with these sacrifices, sacrificing your family, sacrificing a lot of things, and that's just one of the great lessons of this film, themes of this film, just that sacrifice that comes to be somebody great.
Oh yeah. And then, I mean, I personally, it was hilarious to me when that kid walked in like Tom Brady and he plays Division 3. Like that was just hilarious to me. But you know, it's just the whole thing that made that scene so powerful was just how overshadowed he was and how he didn't really get any respect, even though he was in like one of the top jazz bands in the country.
There was an interesting moment in there where they mentioned Charlie Parker and how Charlie Parker died at like 30, drunk and like full of heroin. And I think this is where while I think Andrew is trying to become one of the greats, and while I do think Fletcher is trying to push him to become that, I think there's obviously like there's a limit you have to hit. I think you can manage. I think this film, and I don't think it's intentional, but I think it shows that Andrew thinks you can either be human or be good. And I think in the end, I think personally that he's on his way to being good, but I think also I could see Andrew ending up being dead in the gutter, dead of drugs.
Well, I mean, you can see that by the end, yeah, it was almost a good thing for him to get kicked out of Schaefer because he was on this path to be something absolutely great, and he would do nothing to stop, or he would stop at nothing to gain that status that he had for himself. But at the end, you kind of see, even though he's sacrificed his relationships, even though he's sacrificed even his physical well-being, at the end, he still can do both. He can still live his life and have balance in his life, yet still go for his dreams.
Yeah, and everybody's balance is different. In this case, I mean, I think J.K. Simmons' character, his balance is 100% being the greatest and 0% anything else, like completely absolute. And then Neiman is more so like 99 to 1. Like
Yeah.
He needs to breathe a tiny bit. Like he would go nuts. And obviously he went nuts because he tackled his professor on stage, you know, so he needs a tiny bit of breathing room, but he still accomplished his goal in the end.
Yeah, and maybe that's where I'm coming at it from, is because I'm different in that respect, in that I need a lot more like social relationships while also working, and I think, and maybe that's just the difference of like watching this movie from a different perspective, but you know, I just, because I got it, I was like, oh man, Andrew's just like lost everything. Because like at the end, I was just like, well, we lost him. But you know, once again, that's up to an interpretation.
So at the studio band, the band is introduced to a new song called Caravan, which has very hard timestamps. And Fletcher asks Andrew to stay behind to talk about the song, and reveals that he's brought on Ryan Connolly, who Andrew had been in Nassau Band with. Andrew plays the drums to test the ability of the tempo, but his tempo fails short, and Ryan plays really well. Therefore, Fletcher takes Ryan as the new core drummer.
Like I mentioned earlier, I mean, that blood on the drum set says a lot. It says a lot. He already had wounds from the night before from practicing. So, like, clearly it just shows like how much work he's put in. And it was really satisfying to see him say, Neiman, you got the part, after like if you pay attention to the two guys sitting behind him while he's still standing there with like a fire in his eyes, staring right into J.K. Simmons' face. Like you look at the other two guys behind him in the shadow and they're just like, fuck this. Like excuse my language, but yeah. Yeah. I mean, what a crazy scene, but it's not unrealistic either.
So at this point, we see Andrew go back and he practices harder and harder and harder with a pitcher of water, of ice beside him in case he bleeds. And he goes so hard that he actually starts bleeding with his blisters, and he puts his hand into the water and the water completely fills up with blood. As he fails to reach the tempo, Andrew just punches the drum in frustration. Dude, like that scene was so intense. I mean, It just shows the tenacity of Andrew. He'll stop at nothing to get what he wants.
Absolutely. And that was right after that breakup scene. And that breakup scene I can personally relate to. And that's those, when you make those big sacrifices, like that's a big sacrifice. He really liked that girl. And like that kind of sacrifice hits you very hard because it reminds you that you're not like other people and there's certain things you can't have if this is what you want. And it's a harsh thing to come to terms with. And that for me hits very hard to home. And that scene, it's not a big exaggeration. I probably would have reacted the exact same way.
I also think it's sadly realistic because while I haven't been in that situation, I'm watching that breakup scene, and there's a part of me that's like, come on, Andrew, just come on, dude, don't do this. but then as it goes on, I'm like, no, he meant it, and like that's like he was being truthful. But I feel like I found myself in that because I haven't been in that specific scenario, but I've been in the mindset like before making a decision like that, before like making a dating decision where I'm like, you know what, I'm not, time's not long enough. I don't want to, make a commitment and then end up having to not be able to follow through with it. So,
I mean, it all comes down to what is most important to you. I mean, there's so many instances where you are put in that situation of what is more important to me. And so many of I've been put in that situation so many times, and I have to go back to what is most important to me. And sometimes I've had to let go of opportunities because of the life that I choose to lead and the balance that I choose for myself. If it was this situation, I honestly don't quite know what I would do. I mean, our dreams are so important, but how far are we willing to go? And in this case, Andrews won't stop at anything for what he wants.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to how much blood, sweat, and tears have you put into that dream before you put yourself in that situation.
And what's interesting about that is that in the movie, Miles Teller, who played Andrew, actually during that scene where he's bleeding onto the drum, that was real.
Was it?
He practiced so hard for that scene that he was bleeding. He had blisters and was bleeding, and they just decided to keep it in the film because it's so powerful.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think this is all the close-up shots where like he's intensely practicing. They just filmed that straight, like all of us practicing just straight through, just to get the sweat and make sure everything was like super real.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I didn't know that, but I love this film even more now. Oh my God.
I mean, Miles Teller played pretty much everything himself. He did it to a accompanying track, but everything that you see was real. They didn't use a stunt double or a double for that, except for some of the close-up shots. But everything else, Miles Teller did completely. And there were times even that Damien Chazelle actually did not cut, so that he would just keep going just to get him so tired out for the shot.
He also told J.K. Simmons to like really escalate his character, and then apparently J.K. Simmons was like became super sweet on set in between shots, in between takes, just so they can make like the shooting process like smooth and not a living nightmare.
So at the studio band, Fletcher tearfully reveals in class that a talented performer student of his, Sean Casey, has died in a car accident. The band still rehearses Caravan, but Tanner struggles with the tempo. Fletcher then auditions Andrew, Ryan, and Tanner for hours while the class waits outside, but the three fail to reach the required tempo. When it's now finally Andrew's turn after many, many attempts, Fletcher kicks the chair, then throws the drum away in wrath, and even tells Andrew to increase the tempo. In this process, Andrew's left hand is bleeding and the blood drips onto the drum set. After 1 minute of playing, Fletcher finally tells Andrew that he's earned the part. Now, one thing that I noticed is that the drum was already had red spots on it, and I'm guessing as just a filmmaker that that was because they kept doing many takes on there and the blood just stained it. But what I thought was really cool about that is that there could like the deeper context or the deeper meaning behind that, it could be like show like what I thought from it was that it was showcasing that this has happened so many times with so many drummers in the past that have gone through the same thing, that they've bled onto this drum kit. So it's not just Andrew's experience, but this has happened before.
Yeah, I mean, I say this quote a lot, but it really connects directly with the theme of this film. Is that Martin Luther King once said that you don't judge someone by where they stand in times of comfort and convenience. You judge them by where they stand in times of challenge and controversy. And so how do you react when you're faced with adversity, when you're faced with pain, when you're faced with confrontation? How do you react? Do you cry about it? Do you quit? Or do you persevere? Do you push through? And that tells you, where your character lies and what kind of man you are. And that really, putting Neiman in that boat. I mean, we had those two characters, Fletcher and Neiman, two of the deepest characters that I have seen in a movie in a long time. Like, it's two of the deepest characters because you see him go like night and day, blood, sweat, and tears through thick and thin, and you watch him react in those confrontations. And getting that deep sense of his character is really breathtaking.
So on the way to the jazz competition, the bus stops that Andrew is riding on. It breaks down. So Andrew rents a car, but he arrives late for the rehearsal without his drumsticks. He drives back to the car rental office and retrieves the drumsticks, but as he speeds back, his car is hit by a truck. He crawls from the wreckage, and despite his injury and bloodied face, he struggles to make it to the jazz competition. With his left hand injured, he's unable to play and drops the drumstick on the floor. After that, Fletcher says Andrew that he's done, and Andrew attacks Fletcher in front of the audience.
This whole scene, number one, I love the way it's shot. It was shot very well to make it fast-paced. Number two, I love the dialogue. The dialogue is very tight, and I love how he stands up for himself, because you got to think about how far he's come and how much he's developed coming up to that point, and how he went through hell in that tryout, bleeding on the drums to get there. And it was like, fuck you, this is my part. And then the other drummer behind him is like talking crap or whatever. And he literally turns around and says, "Turns my pages, bitch." And it's just like,
but at the same time, it showcases a little bit of the balls that he's gotten, and kind of like the naivete that he's gotten because of the chances that he's been given. He is still just a student. Like, he doesn't really have the place to tell Fletcher off at that time, and it takes something like this of him getting kicked out to be like, your place, dude. Like, you're not all that. You don't have all this like, you're not all that, but it also helps him to, when he does get kicked out of Fletcher, to kind of reevaluate his life and actually who he is, and actually gives him the courage and the fortitude to keep going.
I think he stood up for himself and was very emotional moment, and I think he had every right to stand up for himself. But he probably could have dialed it back a little bit.
And like I said before, it did take him being kicked out. It gave him a second to take a step back and reevaluate what was really important to him, and if it actually was what he wanted to spend the rest of his life doing. And in the case of this movie, he did decide to go back and pursue that dream of being the best. But at the same time, I'm not sure that he would have had the understanding and fortitude that he did have at the end if he had just been given those chances by Fletcher.
And I think the only reason the only reason he didn't get that chance is just because he had bad luck that whole day. Like, the bus's tire blew out and then he got into a car accident. Like, really, like, it was things that were like, in a sense, I feel like in a different situation, someone could have been like, oh yeah, your bus broke down. Like, I get it. But it was before a competition for like this elite program. And like those people who are at the top of these programs, if they're in a competition, they're not going to be like, they're not going to let you have those excuses, even if it is like something understandable, such as the bus's tire going out, But I also agree that I think it was super important for Andrew to stand up for himself,
because it also shows his fortitude. Like, he will stop at nothing. Literally, he gets in he gets his bus, the tire blows out. He forgets his drumsticks. He gets in a freaking car crash, yet still he comes and he still tries out and he still does his best. Even though he falls short in the end, but he still will stop at nothing.
Yeah. So this moment, that moment right there is a great example of where do you draw that line as far as Fletcher goes. So Fletcher, it shows that Fletcher cares because he still gives him the spot. He shows up late. He's covered in blood. Fletcher just gives him the seat. He lets him do it. He's not like, oh, you're 60 seconds late. I don't care that you got hit by a truck. You're out. Like, he gives him the seat. He got back. But when he fails, when he walks up to him and tells him, you're done, that right there is a little too far, because clearly his hand is not working. Like, clearly something is wrong.
Well, since he showed up like half covered in blood.
Right. Like, it would have been totally reasonable for him to swap to another drummer because he's physically unable to perform. That's understandable. But to tell him you're done, dude, I would have tackled him too. I would have beat the crap out of him again too. I would have beat him to a pulp if he would have walked up to me and said that after everything I just went through.
So Andrew is expelled from Schaefer and is contacted by a lawyer representing the parents of Sean Casey. The lawyer explains that Sean actually hung himself, having suffered anxiety and depression after joining Fletcher's class. Sean's parents want to prevent Fletcher from teaching, and so Andrew agrees to testify and Fletcher is fired. Andrew then goes to a club months later where he sees Fletcher and some jazz performers. As the song ends, Andrew walks out of the club, but Fletcher calls him and they have a chat. Fletcher explains that he pushed his students beyond the expected so that they might achieve greatness. He invites Andrew to perform at JVC Festival concert with his band, and Andrew agrees and invites Nicole, learning, though, that she's in a new relationship. The one quote that I wanted to bring up here, and is just such a wonderful quote that just sums up the entire movie, and that is, there are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job. That's something that I actually was taught from a young age. My dad would always tell me there is no such thing as good enough. You can always be better. And I think that's also like, yeah, that's harsh, but at the same time, as artists, that's always true. We can always do better than what we are doing. And in my case, in my opinion, that's actually what is beautiful about art and especially the art form of movies, that like nothing is completely perfect and you can always do better. Yeah. Don't just work on something, let the thing that you worked on go, and then just learn from that and do better in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I 100% agree. I agree with the principle itself because, Nick, when we went to school, we had professors who in that art school, they wouldn't give A's. We had a couple professors that wouldn't give a grade any higher than a B because of that same principle. And like we had some very harsh.
But at the same time, there were other professors that all they did do was give A's.
Right.
And did you and I learn anything in that class?
Exactly.
No.
Yep. So exactly. Some people get it, some people don't. But yeah, I mean, like the way here's what I always say when it comes to this principle is that growing up, I always compared myself to like the strongest players on the team or the all conference guys or the all state guys or somebody like guys who were like the best in the region or whatever. Or I would go on YouTube and compare myself to artists on YouTube. And my parents always told me, don't compare yourselves to other people. That's not healthy. And everybody else would tell me that too. But I'd be like, no, you're missing the point. I'm not just comparing myself to people who are better than me. I'm also comparing myself to people who are worse than me. Because you need to remind
and also
yourself,
myself.
Yes, and myself. Because you need to remind yourself that while you have things to be proud of, you also have room for growth. And so it could be worse, but you could always be doing better. You can always, like, there's people that you're better at and you have that growth to be proud of, but you also need to not be satisfied. You can be better. There's another level that you haven't reached yet. And so that's the way I always looked at it whenever I compare myself to others. It keeps me pushing. It keeps me driven.
I've heard that too, and while I do agree with that to an extent, I also think that sometimes watching things for comparison, especially with something that you also do, is a learning opportunity for you.
Yes.
Because I think watching people who are doing something that you want to do, who are better than you, helps you learn what you could improve on. So I think that's very important. And I also
I agree.
Yeah, and I think that the good job thing is so weird for me because I agree to an extent, but I also feel like most times that I've heard good job means you've done it adequately. Good job has never been like a 100% positive thing. Like if you do something good and someone goes, "Oh, good job," you're like, "Well, that wasn't the best that I could have done."
Backhanded compliment.
So at JVC on stage, Fletcher tells Andrew he knows he testified against him, and in revenge, he leads the band in a new piece, and Andrew was not given the sheet music for. Andrew gets up and leaves the stage after his humiliating performance, but returns and begins to play Caravan, interrupting Fletcher as he addresses the audience. The rest of the band joins in, and Fletcher finally reluctantly follows suit. Andrew finally ends the performance with an awesome drum solo. Fletcher at first is angry, but as he starts to understand what Andrew is doing, he gives a nod of approval and helps Andrew as he finishes. And finally, the film cuts to black. No applause. Holy crap.
Dude.
This is my favorite moment in all music film history.
Yeah.
Holy crap. This solo, the whole piece, 9 minutes from start to finish, was insanely awesome.
I mean, you don't have to be a musician to understand how incredible that was. Like, I mean, I keep saying I came from a sports background. Even you don't have to be a genius to understand how amazing that was. Like, it's so breathtaking. And I said the very beginning and the very end, my two favorite parts of the whole film. This ending.
And I mean, even just on a filmmaking perspective, like you had so many inserts that throughout the whole thing, just it was almost like a music video because everything was to the beat and It hit exactly the right punches where they needed to hit. It would showcase the different movements, the specific drum beats as they were happening, and just how it was cut together. And the editing was just so good. The cinematography was so good. Everything about that, I could not say anything bad about it.
That back and forth shot between Fletcher and Andrew was beautiful.
Oh yeah, those extreme close-ups of the eyes.
Yeah.
What I love most about Fletcher's close-up on that, you can just barely see his smile peek through the bottom edge of the frame.
But that just showcases how good J.K. Simmons is as an actor. Like, he's so expressed. Like, this film, what it does is it really, like, uses the silences and just holds the silences in some points. It doesn't use too much dialogue than what it needs, and it doesn't just hold on the silences either. And you can just tell what is going on just by the expressions that the actors are having, and it's so subtle but so powerful.
Great example of visual storytelling. I mean, especially the moment, my favorite moment, next to the part where Neiman hits him in the face with the cymbal. I thought that was awesome. But then fast forward like 30 seconds or whatever, and Fletcher picks up the cymbal for him.
Right, exactly.
And that moment right there shows that's the moment you feel their connection. And if he really wanted to sabotage Neiman, like you're led to believe on the surface, he wouldn't have fixed that cymbal. Like that right there shows you like he wants.
Well, I think at the beginning of it, yes, he was trying to kind of sabotage Andrew, but at the end, while Andrew goes off and then comes back, he sees finally that the person that he's been looking for. I mean, you hear him in the jazz club. He said he never actually got his performer, his amazing performer that he's always wanted. But he sees something finally in Neiman when Neiman finally comes back on the stage and just starts playing against and just interrupts what he's saying to the audience, and he sees something in Neiman that he hasn't seen before. Somebody who's willing to go above and beyond what is expected of him, who is willing to push himself farther than anybody else. And finally, when he gets, I think that symbol is the moment where he finally sees it, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna do this. And finally, at the end, he's actually directing him in what to play. And instead of Andrew says to the bassist, "I'll cue you," and then he says to Fletcher, "I'll cue you." But at the end, he doesn't actually need to cue because they're so in tune with each other. They understand where each other are coming from, and that's why finally he gets that redemptive moment as a teacher, as a mentor. Because all throughout the film, like, it's a mentor-student movie, but you don't see that until the end there.
Yeah, that's the moment where they finally connect, and it's just so satisfying. And everything you said, I 100% agree with. There's no subtext anybody's missing where Fletcher is like secretly like using this as an opportunity to hopefully bring the best. No, he was trying to sabotage him. Don't get me wrong. He was trying to sabotage him. He was like, "Fuck you. You made me lose my job. I'm gonna get you." But you're right. Then it turns into, him finally saying, "Oh my God, Neiman, he could do it. He might do it."
The moment that gave me chills was the I'll cue you in, and I'm a huge nerd, so forgive me for this analogy, but that was like an anime protagonist moment. Like I feel like you just see a close up of his eyes, and you just hear "I'll cue you in." But I also think that that moment with his dad, I think, was also super important because I feel like his dad was there to support him, even though he was back with Fletcher, which I thought was really great of his dad. And then his dad even hugs him backstage. While his dad is like, "What are you doing?" he doesn't try to stop him.
But at the same time, like, I saw a little kid moment there where the dad was running. He rushed out when Andrew started going out. He rushed out and went to give Andrew a hug, almost as he was a little, like, still thought of Andrew as a little boy. But Andrew had to take that moment to hug his dad, but then say no. And he turns around, doesn't even say anything to his dad, and walks back on stage. And I think that was a really important moment for even their relationship, saying,
absolutely.
In my opinion, at that point, Andrew's dad is like, yeah, he's supportive, but at the same time, he kind of feels like in the back of the mind that Andrew is going to fail, and he almost wants Andrew to fail so that he will finally, quote, quote, grow up. But in that moment, he finally sees that his son is a man, and this is where he needs to be. And at the end, you even see an insert of his dad looking on, like, in awe of the solo that Andrew is performing, and gets it at that point. So it was a really important point for their relationship as well, I think.
Yeah, I 100% agree. That was a very important moment for it gave closure to their relationship. I think that hit home for me as well, that moment, because I recall a time in my life where I was at an all-time low and I felt like a failure and defeated, or we'll just call it an all-time low. And I had to go back and kind of take a step back. And then all I needed was to just see my dad and see my mom too, but especially my dad. And they just had to tell me it's okay. And then you just take that moment. And then once you get that back, then you can be like, okay, let's try this again. And then you can go back and go attack again. And that moment when he just hugs his dad, doesn't say a word, and he turns back and walks back out to that stage, that is a very emotional moment for me as well in this film. It hits hard.
Because I relate to that, because once all this quarantine stuff happened, working in live theater kind of stopped for a minute. So I'm just back home, but I'm a similar situation where I'm lucky enough that my parents, are very supportive of my career choice. But it's nice to have that to fall back on while I'm also sort of over, like, reanalyzing. I'm like, what do I like? What are the things that I want to do, and I'm willing to work hard to do during this moment of pause that we're kind of in right now for live entertainment.
Yep, and a time to actually come together and actually have discussions about all kinds of things too. Which brings me to the next portion. So this is the point in the show and future episodes where I am going to take some comments that I've seen on our Discord chat, which at this point we haven't had a lot of discussions on our Discord chat yet, but please join the Facebook group and join our Discord so we can talk about the movies, because I'd love to include some of your guys' comments on the podcast so that we can discuss some of the things and can get everybody involved, not just the people that are on the podcast. But with that said, I just want your guys' last thoughts, final thoughts, any reviews.
I mean, if you want my review, it's 5 stars. My final thoughts, you can tell by the way I talk about it in my initial comments. Clearly, I don't think there's anything wrong with this film. And obviously, this one's very personal for me. That's why I chose it. I use this film really as I study this film. Like this film meant a lot to me. It was really good to revisit it. And it hits home really hard, and there's just a lot that you learn from it. And it's a great discussion to have, because clearly half of our conversation was about, fighting for what you love or fighting for a dream and growing as a man or just as a human being, and just very deep concepts that are very simple but very deep and meaningful, and it's something that a lot of people can relate to, and it's a theme that doesn't age, so yeah, I have no complaints about this film. It's one of my favorite films. I love it.
I'm pretty similar. I think when I first watched it, because once I watched it this morning, it's not really a good way to start your day. But I watched it and I remember, but I think because I personally haven't been in that situation, I don't know anyone. I know people who have, but no one like super close to me. That it felt more like, to me, it felt like Andrew got what he wanted, but he lost a part of himself that I think was super important. But that was also my perspective on it. But I think, but Connor, after listening to you talk about it so much and what it means to you, I'm willing to want to give it a rewatch some point, not anytime soon, because it's a movie that I don't think I could watch in repetition.
Yeah.
Because it's just so heavy. But I'd be interested to rewatch it again, thinking about your perspective of it, because it's different from mine to see if I see those things. Because I even wrote that this is almost like a textbook abusive relationship. Between Fletcher and Andrew.
I can see that.
Yeah, which it is, but then also but I do think that Fletcher cared, but I also personally think some of it went way too far.
Yeah.
I also see where he's coming from, in that he's in like they're in like the elite of the elite, they're in the top of the top, and that sometimes to get that out of people, it's sort of it's where you have to go. So I'm interested to give it a rewatch sometime soon.
Well, I love this movie. Thank you so much, Connor, for suggesting this movie as our movie of the week. Because I had kind of forgot about this movie a little bit, even though it's when I saw it the first time, it became one of my favorite movies, and I'm so glad I could rewatch it again because I mean, just the themes are so great. Just the tenacity and the really making us look at what we will actually do for the dreams that we have, and so much of the time we have to ask ourselves, what will we do to actually do that? And I've had so many moments in my own personal life where I've had that crossroads of, am I actually willing to put in that work? And 9 times out of the 10 I want to say yes, but sometimes there are those things that like you just have to sacrifice some things for that and also sacrifice for that dream. So to me, this movie is just such an encouraging movie to keep going, to keep striving, to keep having those conversations with yourself of what are you willing to do, and to just always keep striving for something greater. Always, as my dad always said, never stop dreaming, always dream bigger than what you think you can, because you can reach those goals. So thank you so much, Connor, for getting this.
Absolutely.
As we wrap up here, just want to give you guys a chance to shout out your socials, shout out anything that you're working on at the moment.
I have 2 music videos coming up with the band Yerp. Such a good band. Like, they're next up. Like, they're like, this rock band is killer. You can follow them. I believe at Yerp _ATL, I believe. And you can follow me at Connor Fredrickson. But those 2 music videos, watch out for those, because that's going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm not working on a whole lot right now. But I'm dabbling some stuff. I'm working on some music production. But if you want to follow me on social medias, my Twitter is where I'm the funniest. So because I also dabble in comedy and comedy writing. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, I am at Austin Howarth, and that's pretty much my at on every social media. So that's where I'll be.
Awesome. Well, you can find me. My socials are at nick.fleeto.leach on Instagram. And please listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Podbean, pretty much anywhere you get your podcast. We'd love to have you guys join us at the Cinema Facebook group at facebook.com/group/the Cinema Club TCC. So please join us. You could even be on this podcast if you'd like to be. Thank you so much for joining us on the second episode. Thank you so much, Austin and Connor, for being wonderful guests this week for Whiplash, and we will see you on the next one.